Interested in learning about wine, but not sure where to start? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I'm your host, Haley Bowman, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm a wine enthusiast turned wine educator and founder of the Seattle-based wine tasting business, Cork and Fizz. It is my goal to build your confidence in wine by making it approachable and lots of fun. You can expect to learn everything from how to describe your favorite wine to what to pair with dinner tonight, and so much more. Whether you're a casual wine sipper or a total cork dork like myself, this podcast is for you. So grab yourself a glass and let's dive in. Welcome back to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. This week is our official start of the Italian wine mini-series. I am so excited to bring this to you. I felt like this would be a fun idea to kind of deep dive into a specific wine region and learn a little bit more about it, just so, it's not just like here and there and everywhere and you're trying to, follow along with everything. Now we're just going to deep dive into Italy for the next 8 to 10 episodes or so. If you like this style, let me know. I would love to do other mini series kind of back to back if that's something that you are interested in. We could do countries, we could do different themes. I don't know. Whatever sounds good to you, just let me know. But we're going to start today with our Italian Wine 101. Now, keep in mind, this is just a very, very much beginner intro overview of Italian wine. We would be here forever if I tried to tell you about all the different wine made in Italy. So the ancient Greeks actually called Italy Enotria, which basically means the land of wine. And that is still very accurate today. In fact, Karen McNeil, who's the author of the Wine Bible, has sometimes considered Italian wine to be delicious chaos because of the many regions, hundreds of grape varieties, and often confusing classification system. So the point of this podcast episode, like I said, it's meant to just be an intro. If you start to feel overwhelmed by Italian wines, don't worry. The top wine experts in the world are often overwhelmed by Italian wine, so you are not alone. So just take it step by step. Maybe you return to this episode 2 or 3 more times after your first listen, and each time you listen, you'll learn something new. And more than anything, don't worry about learning it all because that's truly impossible. Even the Italian wine experts out there have to look things up. So just enjoy learning about some popular Italian wine regions and maybe grab a few tidbits of information that you can use. But more than anything, just enjoy the episode. So speaking of a lot of wine, let me share some numbers with you when it comes to Italian wine. So there are 1.8 million acres of vineyards in Italy, 384,000 wineries, and 41 million hectoliters of wine produced. And that makes it the number 1 wine-producing country of 2024. They also have over 590 catalogued grape varieties in the country. This is more than any other country. Now, equally, if not more important than the grapes, are the wine regions. There is no region in Italy that does not produce wine, so it's nearly impossible to list all of the wine regions of Italy, and it's certainly impossible to do in a 30-minute podcast episode. Overall, though, from the research that I did, most wine experts consider there to be about 15 or so main wine regions in Italy. So these include Piedmont and Lombardy in northwest Italy, Trentino, Alto Adige, Veneto, Friuli-Venezia Giulia, and Emilia-Romagna in northeast Italy, Tuscany, Le Marche, Umbria, Lazio, and Abruzzo in central Italy, and Puglia, Campania, Sicily, and Sardinia in southern Italy / the islands. We're going to just focus on 5 of those regions today because we do not have all day. We're going to talk about Piedmont, Veneto, Friuli-Venezia Giulia, Tuscany, and Sicily. Now, coming later in this mini-series, you'll get to learn more about Sardinia from someone who's actually building and starting a winery there. And I'll actually have a full podcast episode on Piedmont as well. So I'll only discuss that region briefly. Like I said, this is meant to be your intro, your little overview, and then we'll start deep diving into some other episodes. And for any of the regions I don't cover, let me know. Do you want me to do a part 2 to this? Maybe they'll end up being a part 3 as well, since there are like 15 major regions. And if there's a specific region that you'd like me to dedicate an entire episode to, let me know that as well. You can always message me on Instagram at Cork and Fizz or send me an email, haley@corkandfizz.com. I think there's also a phone number that you can text that is in the show notes. And I get those texts. Those all go to me. It's not like some other thing. It all goes to me. So send me a text and let me know which wine region of Italy I should tell you more about. Just a quick reminder, if you are not on my mailing list yet, what are you waiting for? I would love for you to join. When you do, you'll get a free shopping guide that has 15 of my favorite wines under $15. Head to corkandfizz.com, scroll down to the bottom, and there'll be a little section where you can join the mailing list. I send out a weekly newsletter filled with wine tips, recommendations, special offers, and so much more. Now, let's get back to the show. Now, before we dive into those 5 regions, I do want to give a little heads up on reading labels. Just like if you listen to my French Wine 101 episode, which I think it's episode 19, I said the same thing here. When you are buying Italian wine or French wine, and you want to become more confident with Italian wine or French wine, understanding how to read the wine label is incredibly important. So now specifically talking about Italy, there are 3 key naming methods. So the first one is by variety, or you could also consider this a hybrid. And this is because it says the grape variety, but it often will say the region as well. So an example of this would be Barbera de Asti. Barbera is the grape variety, and de Asti means from the region of Asti. Another one from that same region, Moscato de Asti. So Moscato is the grape variety, and de Asti means from the region of Asti. Langhe Nebbiolo, this is another one. It's named by the variety, but it mentions the region as well. Langhe as the region and Nebbiolo as the grape. That's the first naming method. The second one is purely region. So they are not mentioning the grape variety. Just like with French wine, each appellation in Italy has a set of rules that dictate what grapes are inside each bottle. So this is why they can just label it by the region, because with the region there and the rules that they have, you'll know that, oh, because this is labeled Chianti, for example, it has to be at least 90% Sangiovese. Oh, man, forgot for a second. Or let's say it's labeled Barolo. This has to be 100% Nebbiolo. So we have naming by variety / a hybrid, because they usually say variety and region. Then there's just region. And then the last one, which is probably the most difficult, is a made-up name. A good example of this is Sassicaia, which is a very expensive, well-known, super Tuscan wine from Tuscany. But the Sassicaia it's technically an IGT, but it's not a region of its own. So it's just a made-up name that they gave it, and now they know that a Sassicaia is a super Tuscan. Kind of crazy, right? So again, it helps to know kind of how they're naming it. So look for either by variety, by region, or by made-up name. And Italy also has its own wine classification system. And this is similar to that of France, if you remember me talking about the AOCs in that French Wine 101 episode. So the classification basically ensures that you get the right type of wine and it is a certain quality of wine. So I always like to think about this as a pyramid. At the top of the pyramid is the DOCG, and this stands for Denominación de Origen Controlada y Garantida. And this is basically like the most rigorous rules and restrictions. They meet the DOC standards, which we'll talk about. That's the next tier down, along with, like I said, more rigorous growing, aging, and quality specifications. There are 76 DOCGs in Italy. And again, this is usually Italy's most expensive wines, but not always. There are a few exceptions. Then moving down the pyramid, the middle tier is DOC, which is Denominación de Origen Controlada. Now, as of 2021, there were 332 DOCs. Again, the DOC basically gives them rules on winemaking, percentages of allowed grape varieties. It's just not as strict as a DOCG. And finally, your bottom tier of the pyramid is IGT. This stands for Indicación de Geográfica Típica. Basically, these are mostly table wines from larger geographical regions. Or it's a regional wine that's made from non-Italian grapes. A really good example of this is a Super Tuscan. I mentioned this above with like the made-up names. Super Tuscans have a really unique background. It's basically when these winemakers started growing non-Italian grapes in Tuscany. So Tuscany is most known for Sangiovese. And these winemakers started growing like Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, and blending it with Sangiovese. And they were making really great wines, but the officials in Italy did not want them growing non-Italian grapes, so they weren't going to give them a DOC or a DOCG. And so these people said, you know what, whatever. I know I'm making a great wine. Let's just call them Super Tuscans. We'll do the IGT. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, and we'll sell them like that. So that is why you will see Super Tuscans that can fall under that IGT. There is technically one more level below the IGT, and this is VDT, which is just Vino de Tavola, which just stands for table wine. These are basic table wines with absolutely no regional designation. They follow zero rules. They do whatever you want. There could be some really great ones. It could just be the wine that somebody makes in their backyard for their family. So nothing specific on that. Okay, now you have a little bit of a better idea about reading the labels, general idea of Italian wine. Let's dig into our 5 different regions. So we're going to start off with Piedmont. As I mentioned, I'm planning to do an entire podcast episode on Piedmont. It's the one right after this one, actually. So we won't spend too much time here, but I do want to give you a little bit of the basics. Piedmont is located in the northwest corner of Italy. It has a cooler climate than most of Italy, and so this results in a shorter growing season for the grapes, which results in a lighter, high-acid wine. In terms of geography, Piedmont is full of mountains and rolling foothills. Almost all vineyards in Piedmont are in the eastern or southern part of the region. This region is most known for the red wines of Barolo and Barbaresco. Also makes the famous slightly sparkling sweet wine Moscato d'Asti. And again, if you don't know what these are, don't worry. We're going to dive deep into them in next week's episode. In terms of key grapes here, kind of repeating over a couple of things, Nebbiolo is the red wine grape. I guess I should say red grape that is most popular in this region. It makes up Barolo, Barbaresco, and then also a lot of Langhe. Langhe is also a larger region within Piedmont that makes a lot of Nebbiolo. Another popular red wine is Barbera. And so Nebbiolo is known for being like high tannin, high acidity. It's got a lot of this like red fruit, but with the leathery kind of aroma to it. And that tannin is really strong. So these wines are meant to age for a very long time. Versus Barbera, which is another red wine grown in this region. Now you'll find this in Asti and Alba. And Barbera tends to be more like the fruity, fun counterpart to Nebbiolo's like, I don't know, I'm like thinking more like strict, polished, age-worthy, right? So Barbera is just like, fun, this is good. Can still age a little bit, but it's more meant to be drank early, and it goes great with pizza. Another red wine, Dolcetto. Pretty much everywhere you find Nebbiolo or Barbera, you can also find Dolcetto, but it's not always given the best land. It's a misunderstood grape because the word itself, Dolcetto, means sweet one. And that actually just describes the taste of the grape before you make the wine. Like the grape itself is kind of sweet, but like the wine you make is not. The only like DOCG that is known for just Dolcetto is Dogliani. And Dolcetto tends to have a lower acidity than both Barbera and Nebbiolo. In terms of some other grapes that you'll find in Piedmont, Moscato, of course, we talked about that. That is typically made into a sweeter white wine in an Asti. They are famous for a slightly sparkling version. And then if you want a red Moscato, essentially, you should try Bracchetto, which is a lovely red grape, typically, again, made into a slightly sweet, sparkling red wine. And then Cortese is a white wine from Piedmont that I don't think gets enough attention. I love this grape, and I honestly sometimes forget that it's from Piedmont. Cortese is the grape, but the wine is often labeled as Gavi, Gavi. It's just a very food-friendly, people-friendly, like, it's just a good white wine. I don't really have another good description of it. We'll dive into it more in next week's episode. Okay, moving on to our second region. So talking about Friuli-Venezia Giulia. Now, this is often just shortened to Friuli, and it's probably what I'm going to say for the rest of the episode, even though I sound very fancy when I say the full name. This podcast is sponsored by Repour Wine Savers. Listen, I love wine, but that doesn't mean I want to drink a full bottle every night. You see, it's always a risk opening a bottle knowing I'll only have a glass or two. But now I don't worry about that at all because I have Repour. These little contraptions will keep your open bottles of wine good for up to 3 months by removing oxygen from the bottle using fancy chemistry. And they're so easy to use. I simply open a bottle of wine, cork or screw cap, just like normal, and enjoy my glass or two. Then, when I'm ready to call it a night, I rip the foil off my Repour wine saver and place it in the bottle in place of the cork or screw cap, and then stick the bottle in the fridge. Simple as that. Then, whenever I grab another glass from that bottle in the future, I just make sure to put the Repour back on as soon as I'm done pouring. It's that easy. Want to give Repour a try? Head to repour.com, REPOUR.com, and use code CORKANDFIZZ for 10% off your order. That's Repour, REPOUR.com, and use code CORKANDFIZZ. No spaces in that, and the "and" is spelt out, so it's CORKANDFIZZ. Once you have Repour, you'll never have to worry about opening a bottle of wine just for one glass. I mean, heck, now you can try 2 or more wines at the same time and have your own at-home wine tasting. This podcast is sponsored by the Cork Crew Virtual Wine Club. Interested in trying new wines, but not sure where to start? Or maybe you've been listening to this podcast for a while and you love the idea of tasting wine live with me. If that's you, come join my Cork Crew Virtual Wine Club, and you'll get to sip wine with me twice a month while I help you find new favorite wines. The Cork Crew is not your ordinary wine club. This is a community of people who are passionate about exploring new flavors, learning about different wine styles, and having fun along the way. And the best part about this club, purchasing the wine is completely optional. Plus, all events are recorded, and you have access to the full library of recordings as a Cork Crew member, so you can always catch up if you can't make it live. Oh, and did I mention it's virtual, which means you get to do all of this from the comfort of your sofa in your PJs. No need to worry about driving in crappy traffic, finding a designated driver, or spending an arm and a leg on a taxi. Want to give it a try without the commitment? You're in luck. Right now, I'm offering a free class pass to anybody who wants to try out the Cork Crew Virtual Wine Tasting Club. With this pass, you'll be able to join a Cork Crew event of your choosing. No strings attached. I don't need your credit card. I don't need you to sign up for anything. You'll be my guest. Simply head to corkandfizz.com/free class pass to get your class pass and be one step closer to becoming a member of the best wine tasting club around, the Cork Crew. I can't wait to see you there. Now let's get back to the show. In terms of where this is, you will find Friuli in the northeast corner. So we were in the northwest talking about Piedmont. Now we're moving over to the northeast. And these are all like not, when you think about Italy and it kind of looks like that boot, right? These are all kind of like before the boot starts. They're all the way at the top. And so, yeah, Friuli is in the northeast corner of Italy and it borders Austria and Slovenia. This region is culturally and historically rich. I mean, for centuries, many of the Northern Europeans moved through this region on their way to the Mediterranean, and now it essentially connects Western Europe with Central and Eastern Europe. The climate in Friuli can be considered maritime, which is actually a similar climate to where I'm at right now in Seattle, Washington. So they experience hot and sunny days, which help those grapes ripen and develop flavors, along with the cooler nights which trap the flavors and acidity in the grape. Bordering the region to the north are the Alps, and to the south you have the Adriatic Sea. Due to this, most of the vineyards are going to be located in the southern half, and also specifically on sunny slopes facing the equator. Remember, anytime you hear somebody say slopes facing the equator, unless it's a really hot region, they're telling you those are the best vineyards. Anytime there are vineyards on a slope facing the equator, my head usually perks up and I go, ooh, tell me more. There's something about the slope and the way that the sun hits it at some specific angle that it is just perfect for the grapes. Now, in Friuli, Italy itself isn't normally famous for its white wines, but the region of Friuli is the exception. I mean, there's probably some other exceptions too, but Friuli comes to mind as one of the first. The white wines in Friuli are some of the best in the country, and honestly, some of the best in the world. They're vibrant and racy with complex, fruity, spicy, earthy flavors. This is probably one of the only regions in the world where I'd recommend you order a Pinot Grigio. And I'm so sorry for the Pinot Grigio hate. I'm sure there is great Pinot Grigio, also known as Pinot Gris in France. I'm sure there's great Pinot Grigio everywhere, but sometimes it can just be kind of boring, in my opinion. But not from Friuli. It is the opposite of boring in Friuli. So definitely try a Friuli Pinot Grigio. Also, I'm so sorry if you love Pinot Grigio. You can just ignore everything I said. Everybody has their own likes and dislikes. Beyond Pinot Grigio, some other white wines you'll find in Friuli include Friulano. This grape is, it's named after the region, or the region's named after the grape. I don't actually know. But anyway, it's found in Friuli. It's like Sauvignon Blanc, but with bolder fruit and subtler herbal flavors. So if you like Sauvignon Blanc, but sometimes you're like, I wish this didn't smell quite like grass, then you should try a Friulano. Another really unique white wine from this region is called Ribolla Gialla. This is an attractive aromatic wine with citrus peach flavors. And I've actually seen this grape used to make a lot of orange wines as well. And then, of course, you can also find Sauvignon Blanc in Friuli. Now, despite me hyping up the white wine of Friuli, they pretty much make equal amounts red and white wine. The most popular reds tend to be Merlot and Cabernet Franc, but they have two well-known local varieties as well, red specifically. Refosco is one, and this is actually, I didn't realize this, but it's a collective name for a handful of different varieties. These tend to produce a zesty, inky, easy-drinking red. Or, and I read this in the same sentence, and it was like, or they can be really complex, deep red. So pretty much, Refosco can make a lot of different things, and you should just give it a try. The second local red grape is Schioppettino, and this is more of a sophisticated, it makes really sharp, concentrated reds with lots of fruit and lots of spice. Okay, that was Friuli-Venezia Giulia, also often just called Friuli. Now, we are going to head just west of Friuli to our next region, which is Veneto. Now, Veneto is not as influenced by the Alps as Friuli, but rather by the rivers that flow through the region. In fact, most of Veneto is rich, fertile farmland, which you're like, okay, if we're talking about this being a well-known great grape wine producing region, I don't think it makes sense that it's really fertile farmland. No, you're right. Fertile farmland does not make high quality grapes. Remember, our grapes, they like to struggle and work hard. So most of the vineyards in Veneto are planted on the hills away from that fertile farmland. And similar to Friuli, this region has a cooler climate, so you should expect more acidity in the wine. Now, the wine you have probably heard of from Veneto is Prosecco. This is a tank method sparkling, meaning it's different from champagne, where they do a second fermentation in the bottle to make the bubbles. For Prosecco, they do a second fermentation in the tank. And I think for the longest time, I always thought that the tank method is just a lesser than method. It's not as, good as the bottle method. But I've come to learn that it's just simply a different method, and it produces different flavors. And it's just creates a different style of wine than sparkling. Neither is better or less than, they're just different. And so with the tank method, they tend to get a little bit more, and they preserve the floral, fruity flavors of the grape itself and don't overwhelm it with more of the yeasty flavor that you get from a champagne that does the second fermentation in a bottle. So Prosecco is a tank method sparkling made from a grape called Glera. Though there's this whole story about how technically the grape used to be called Prosecco, but then everybody was making Prosecco everywhere, and the people of Prosecco were like, no. We don't want to be confused with some cheap American brand. And so they came up with this whole thing, named a region Prosecco, and then called the grape Glera. So now they are the only ones that can make Prosecco. Anyway, it is wonderful. There's also a UNESCO heritage site in the region of Prosecco that is absolutely gorgeous, and they make wine there as well, and it's some of the top Prosecco in the world. Beyond Prosecco, you can also find Soave, which is one of my favorite Italian white wines. It is made from a grape called Garganaga, and it's a dry white that is often compared to Chablis. So think higher acidity, but not so sharp that it's it like hurts right. It's going to be like, it's still going to have that smoothness to it. It's going to be very mineral forward, a lot of like citrus flavors. Oh, anytime we're out to eat and we need to order a bottle of wine for the table, I tend to go with Soave, and it pairs with everybody's dinner and everybody's always very happy. Now, that's one of my favorite white wines from Italy. One of my newest favorite wines from Italy is a red called Valpolicella. And Valpolicella, again, is the region. It's the name of the wine within Veneto. And so the grapes itself, it's made out of a few different grapes, but the two top ones are Corvina and Corvinone. Valpolicella has lots of different styles, the most famous of which is Amarone della Valpolicella. So if you ever heard of Amarone, this is actually a Valpolicella, and it's made in the region of Veneto. We could have I think I do need to have a podcast episode all about Valpolicella because it is such a cool wine. But just know, Amarone is going to be this really rich version. It's basically where they dry the grapes out. And then typically when you dry the grapes, you're making a sweet wine, but they ferment it all the way so there's no sweetness left. So it is usually just an incredibly rich red wine. But the thing is, they also make different styles of this Valpolicella. So there's just like, if you just see a bottle labeled Valpolicella, that's kind of considered the bottom of the pyramid, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's more of like an easy drinking, fruity red wine. And then going up one, there's one in the middle, and I'm forgetting what it's called. Valpolicella Ripasso. It's honestly my favorite style of it. It's somewhere in between, because what happens is they make a regular Valpolicella, but then they use some of the leftover grape skins from the Amarone, and they add that in to the wine while it's fermenting and while it's aging, and it's just adds a little bit of this richness that is really special. Valpolicella, definitely another wine to try from Veneto. All right, we are breezing through this. So our next region is Tuscany. So this is located on the western side of central Italy. So now we've made it to like the middle of the boot. This is basically quintessential wine region of Italy. It has strong ties to religion and art in this area. Tuscany is also the true land of varying mesoclimates, basically meaning that like each vineyard has its own climate, even if they're only a mile or two away from each other. And this is thanks to the endless succession of twisting, turning hills and low mountains throughout the region. Also due to the endless hills and mountains, nearly every vineyard is on a slope. Tuscany, since it's further south than the other regions that we mentioned today, it will be warmer, but it does also experience cool nights. Now, talking about grapes, Tuscany is the birthplace to 4 of Italy's most important red wines: Chianti, Chianti Classico, Brunello di Montalcino, and Vino Nobile di Montepulciano. Now, fun fact, all of those wines are made with the same grape, Sangiovese. However, due to the differing mesoclimates, remember those different vineyard climates, the grape developed variations in each of the different regions, resulting in a drastically different wine, all made from the same grape. I will also have an episode later in this mini-series dedicated to Sangiovese. So we will talk way more about that. We will dive into the confusion of why is it in so many areas and they all have different names. And I might not be able to say why, but we can at least explain it. Now, Tuscany is most known for Sangiovese, but I mentioned earlier there's also a good amount of Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, which are used in super Tuscan blends. They also do have some white grapes in Tuscany, namely Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Trebbiano, which Trebbiano itself isn't the most exciting white wine. It can be kind of neutral in flavor, but it's best used in Vinsanto, which is a dessert wine that I'm going to tell you about in a second. And then Vermentino is the other white wine popular in Tuscany. This is more of a refreshing, full of flavor white. It's also popular in other regions beyond Tuscany. It is citrusy with grassy herbs and bitter almond. Now, I mentioned earlier, Trebbiano is used to make Vinsanto. Another grape, Malvasia Bianca, is also used to make Vinsanto in Tuscany. And Vinsanto is just, I think it's one of the best dessert wines I've ever had. It might even beat Sautern. It might. The grapes to make this wine are dried on straw mats, kind of like our Valpolicella, but they are not fermented all the way. So they stay sweet and it is really lovely. It's nice to have with just a nice, what am I thinking of? Those cookies you have with coffee? Biscotti. It's good with some biscotti. I wouldn't dip it in the wine. I have tried that before and does not work as well, but just having a bite of wine and a bite of the biscotti works really well. Okay, on to our last region. Let's talk about Sicily. Sicily is Italy's largest island and one of the largest islands in the Mediterranean. It is also one of Italy's top producers of wine and the largest region land-wise. Most climates that you can find throughout Italy can be found in Sicily, from the snowy peaks of Mount Etna to the warm waters of the Tyrrhenian Sea. Overall, it's considered a warm Mediterranean climate, right? Makes sense. It's an island in the Mediterranean Sea. This means lots of sunshine, lots of heat, also means not a lot of rain. Most of Sicily gets only the bare minimum necessary of rainfall to grow vines. Irrigation can also be tough with very few rivers that are constantly flowing. Now, geography-wise, there are two key factors at play on Sicily. First, you have Mount Etna and this high elevation. So this creates a freshness by decreasing the temperature, leads to higher levels of aroma, fresh fruit flavors, low alcohol, and higher acidity. That high elevation also gives you diurnal temperatures. That's where the difference between the temperature during the day and the temperature at the night is drastically different. The second geographical factor is the soil types in most of Sicily. It keeps the vines cool. Most of the soil in Sicily is made from calcium carbonate. It is white in color, so it reflects the sun. Now, the main spot that is different from this is on Mount Etna, but again, that is at a higher elevation, and there you will have black volcanic soil that is rich in minerals and gives lots of really smooth, structured tannin to the red wines. Now, talking about grapes in Sicily, there are over 65 native varietal species on the island of Sicily. Two of those popular whites are Grillo and Catarato. Grillo makes dry, racy whites that are spicy, peppery with an exotic orange and herbal note to them. It kind of makes me think of like a Gruner Veltliner, to be honest. And then Caricante is the most planted white. It has good acidity, low alcohol, subtle melon or peach aromas, and a little bit of that salinity, kind of like think about like the smell of the ocean. They also grow a good amount of Riesling on Sicily. As for the reds, they primarily grow the native varietals Nera de Avolo, Nerello Mascalese, and Frappato. So Nera de Avolo is certainly the most popular. It is made in a various of styles based on where it's grown. So I've had everything from like a really rich, deep in color, just like full-bodied Nera de Avolo from a warmer climate versus something from a cooler area is going to have a higher acidity and not be quite so full-bodied. This grape grows so well here because it loves the heat. Another one of the grapes, Nerello Mascalese, which along with Nerello Cappuccio makes up an Etna Rosso, which is one of my absolute favorite red wines. This wine has the elegance of a Pinot, but the structure of a Nebbiolo, and it's just, everyone loves it. Everyone I've introduced to Etna Rosso just loves it. The third one is Frappato. This is a very elegant, refreshing, floral, and fruity. I've talked about this before. I just shared it on Instagram, actually, and I talked about how it has this really nice red fruit while also having this nice floral note to it. It has a nice lively acidity and more moderate alcohol, so not quite as intense as that Nero de Avolo. Sicily is also known for its Marsala, which is a fortified white wine that isn't always sweet. I know I hear fortified and you're like, oh, it's sweet wine. Not always. It's kind of similar to sherry in that way. Okay, that's it. That's our Italian Wine 101 episode, at least part one of it, right? We did not cover every wine in Italy. So if you want me to do a part 2 where we cover more wine regions like this, or maybe if you want me to do a deep dive into a particular Italian wine or Italian wine region, let me know. Message me at Cork and Fizz on Instagram or send me an email, Haley@corkandfizz.com, or you can text me at that number in the show notes if it shows up for you. I'm still figuring that out. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. If you loved it as much as I did, I would so appreciate it if you could rate it, leave a review if you haven't already, and share it with more of the wine lovers in your life. In next week's episode, as I've mentioned, we are going to deep dive into Piedmont. They have such amazing wines in that region, and there are just so many well-known that I felt like it deserved its own episode. Thanks again for listening, and if you want to learn more about wine, come follow me at Cork and Fizz on Instagram. If you're interested in exploring new wines, like all of these different Italian wines, and joining an incredibly welcoming, wonderful community of wine lovers, be sure to sign up for my virtual tasting club, The Cork Crew. You can head to thecorkcrew.com to learn more and use code WINE101 when signing up to get your first month free. Cheers!